You walk away from another conversation feeling hollow, defeated, like every word you spoke pushed you further from your own truth. That burning sensation in your chest isn't just frustration, it is the recognition that you've been playing a game you were never meant to win. The loudest voices in the room aren't the strongest, they're the most desperate. And while you've been trained to believe that silence equals weakness, you've missed the most devastating truth of all. Here is the shocking reality that will shatter everything you think you know about power. The moment you feel compelled to defend yourself, you've already lost the war. What if I told you that every argument you've ever won was actually a surrender? That every time you raised your voice to be heard, you revealed exactly where your weaknesses lie? The masters of human psychology have known this secret for centuries, yet society has conditioned you to do the exact opposite. The illusion that is destroying your power. Right now, millions of people are trapped in an endless cycle of verbal combat, believing that the person who speaks last, speaks loudest, or speaks most convincingly wins. They're wrong, dead wrong. And this misconception is systematically destroying their ability to influence, command respect, or maintain any real authority in their relationships, careers, and personal lives. Friedrich Nietzsche, one of history's most misunderstood philosophers, saw through this illusion with brutal clarity. He recognized that most human communication isn't about truth, connection, or even persuasion, it is about fear. Fear of being wrong, fear of being ignored, fear of appearing weak, and fear, he knew, makes slaves of us all. Think about the last heated discussion you had. Really think about it. Were you listening to understand, or were you frantically preparing your rebuttal? Were you seeking truth, or were you desperately trying to prove you weren't stupid, weren't wrong, weren't less than? That frantic energy you felt that need to jump in, to correct, to defend, that was your ego in full panic mode. Here is what is really happening when you feel that urge to respond. Immediately, your brain is being hijacked by the same primitive survival mechanisms that kept our ancestors alive in physical danger. But here is the problem. You are not being chased by a predator. You are sitting in a meeting, talking to your partner, or scrolling through comments online. Yet your nervous system can't tell the difference. It floods your body with stress hormones that cloud your judgment, weaken your position, and make you react from a place of desperation rather than strength. Nietzsche called this phenomenon herd morality, the unconscious programming that makes you seek approval, validation, and acceptance from others at the cost of your own power. Every time you explain yourself to someone who hasn't earned that explanation, every time you defend a position that doesn't require defense, every time you argue with someone who has already made up their mind, you are feeding the system that keeps you weak. The psychology of dominance through absence. But what happens when you simply don't respond? When you sit back, observe, and let others reveal themselves while you remain an enigma? Something extraordinary occurs, something that modern psychology has only recently begun to understand, but that Nietzsche intuited over a century ago. Silence creates a psychological vacuum, and nature abhors a vacuum. When you choose not to react, you are not just withholding your response, you are forcing the other person to confront the echo of their own voice. Without your pushback, without your validation or resistance, they lose their anchor. They begin to question themselves. Why isn't he responding? Did I say something wrong? Does he know something I don't? The devastating truth about human psychology is this. Most people can't tolerate being ignored, because being ignored forces them to be alone with their own thoughts. And for most people that is terrifying. Dr. Timothy Wilson's groundbreaking research at the University of Virginia proved just how desperate people are to avoid their own minds. In his famous study, participants were left alone in a room with nothing but a button that would deliver a painful electric shock, rather than sit quietly with their thoughts for just 15 minutes. 67% of men and 25% of women chose to shock themselves repeatedly. Think about that. People would rather experience physical pain than psychological silence. Now imagine what happens when you become the source of that silence. When your calm, measured non-response creates that same psychological void in someone else's mind. They don't just feel ignored, they feel exposed, vulnerable, transparent. Their arguments, once delivered with such confidence, suddenly sound hollow in the absence of your resistance. This is why manipulators, narcissists, and emotional vampires are so disturbed by people who don't react. Their entire playbook depends on getting an emotional response from you. When you don't give them that response, you break their script. They escalate. They try new tactics. They become increasingly desperate. And in that desperation, they reveal exactly who they are. The Übermensch, master of silent authority. Nietzsche wrote extensively about the Übermensch, often mistranslated as Superman, but better understood as the Overman, or superior human. This isn't about genetic superiority or physical dominance. It is about psychological mastery. The Übermensch has transcended the need for external validation and no longer lives in reaction to the world around him. Picture this person. He walks into a room and immediately commands attention without saying a word. When challenged, he doesn't rush to defend himself. When criticized, he doesn't crumble or counterattack. When others are shouting over each other, he simply observes. And somehow mysteriously, he becomes the most powerful person in the room. This isn't mystical or supernatural. It is psychological warfare at its most sophisticated level. The Übermensch understands that true power isn't about dominating others. It is about dominating yourself. It is about having such complete control over your own reactions, emotions, and responses that you become unpredictable, unmanipulable, and ultimately, undefeatable. Here is the secret that changes everything. The person who controls their own reactions controls the entire interaction. Think about the most influential people you know. Not the loudest, but the most influential. They share a common trait. They speak less than others expect, and more than others deserve. When they do speak, people listen because their words are rare, measured, and purposeful. They've mastered the art of strategic silence. But this kind of silence isn't passive. It is not the silence of the defeated or the afraid. It is the silence of the hunter who knows that movement reveals position, that patience creates opportunity, and that the right moment is worth waiting for. When silence becomes your weapon, let me share something that might disturb you. You've been giving away your power every single day without realizing it. Every time you feel compelled to explain yourself to someone who hasn't earned that explanation. Every time you defend a position that doesn't require defense. Every time you argue with someone who is arguing in bad faith. You think you are standing up for yourself, but you are actually standing down from your true power. The moment you feel the need to justify your position, you've already accepted that someone else has the authority to judge it. Nietzsche saw this pattern everywhere. People living their entire lives in response to others, never from their own center, never from their own truth. They become professional reactors, emotional puppets dancing to whatever tune others play. And the tragedy is, they think this reactive living is strength. Real strength looks different. It looks like the CEO who doesn't feel compelled to respond to every criticism in the company Slack channel. It looks like the parent who doesn't engage with their teenager's emotional manipulation tactics. It looks like the person who can listen to an insult and simply observe it, rather than internalize it or reflect it back. This doesn't mean becoming cold or disconnected. It means becoming selective. It means understanding that your energy, your attention, and your responses are valuable resources that should be invested wisely, not scattered like seeds in infertile ground. The dark side, when your silence is used against you. But here is where this gets dangerous, and why most people never master this power. There is a difference between the silence of strength and the silence of suppression. And if you get this wrong, you won't become powerful, you'll become a doormat. Some of you reading this have been conditioned to believe that not responding is always the mature thing to do, that avoiding conflict equals wisdom, that keeping peace at any cost is noble. This is not the silence of the Übermensch. This is the silence of the victim. The most insidious trap is learning to mistake your own oppression for enlightenment. There are people in your life right now who have trained you to stay quiet. They've convinced you that your silence is a virtue while they use it to control you, manipulate you, and extract value from you without giving anything back. They've weaponized your desire to be good against your own interests. This is what Nietzsche called slave morality, a value system that teaches you to celebrate your own diminishment, to find virtue in making yourself smaller, to feel proud of not taking up space. And it is everywhere. How do you know if you are caught in this trap? Ask yourself, when you choose silence, do you feel powerful or powerless? Do you feel like you are choosing your response, or do you feel like response has been chosen for you? Do you remain silent because you don't need to speak, or because you are afraid of what might happen if you do? The silence of strength feels like controlled energy, like a coiled spring, like potential power held in reserve. The silence of suppression feels like heaviness, like swallowed words, like parts of yourself dying slowly. The transformation, from reactive to response-able. Here is how you begin to reclaim your power and transform your silence from weakness into strength. First, kill the need to be understood. This is the hardest part because we're social creatures with deep programming that equates understanding with survival. But the truth is, most people don't want to understand you, they want to use you. When you release the desperate need to be seen, heard, and validated by others, you stop giving them power over your emotional state. Second, become a student of human behavior, rather than a participant in human drama. When someone is pushing your buttons, step back mentally and observe what they're really doing. Are they seeking truth or seeking power? Are they trying to understand or trying to control? Most of the time, you'll realize their behavior has nothing to do with you and everything to do with their own internal chaos. Third, develop strategic patience. In our instant, everything culture, the person who can wait has already won. When someone attacks you verbally, demands an immediate response, or tries to pressure you into reacting, the most powerful thing you can do is pause. Let them sit in their own energy while you consider your options from a place of calm. Fourth, master the art of the strategic response. When you do choose to speak, make it count. One well-placed sentence after a long pause can have more impact than a 10-minute explanation. Learn to speak from fullness, not emptiness, from choice, not compulsion. The practical application: silence as strategy. Let me give you specific scenarios where this power becomes immediately practical. In meetings, instead of jumping in with every idea or defensive comment, observe the dynamics. Notice who is performing, who is actually contributing, who is seeking attention versus who is solving problems. When you do speak, it will carry more weight because people have been wondering what you are thinking. In relationships, when your partner is upset and trying to draw you into an emotional reaction, resist the urge to defend, explain, or counterattack. Listen completely, pause, and then respond from a place of choice rather than reaction. This breaks the cycle of escalation and often leads to real resolution instead of just temporary ceasefires. On social media, the urge to correct every wrong opinion, respond to every provocation, or defend yourself against every criticism is strong. But every time you engage with bad faith actors, you are giving them what they want: your energy, your attention, your emotional investment. Strategic silence here literally starves trolls and manipulators of their primary fuel source. At work, when someone tries to blame you for something, criticizes your work unfairly, or attempts to make you the scapegoat for their failures, your first instinct might be to defend yourself immediately. Instead, pause, let them finish. Let the silence hang in the air. Often they'll talk themselves into revealing their true motivations or contradicting their own position. Here is the psychological principle at work. People fill silence with their own fears, assumptions, and projections. The longer you remain quiet, the more they reveal about themselves. The ultimate test: living beyond reaction. The final test of this power isn't whether you can be quiet during a heated argument. It is whether you can build a life that doesn't revolve around other people's opinions, expectations, or emotional states. It is whether you can wake up each morning and live from your own center, rather than in response to yesterday's conflicts or tomorrow's anxieties. Nietzsche believed that most people never actually live their own lives. They live a reaction to life, a response to circumstances, a reflection of what others expect from them. The Übermensch breaks this pattern completely. He creates his own values, chooses his own battles, and responds to the world from a place of internal authority, rather than external pressure. This is the difference between being responsible and being reactive. One is a choice made from strength, the other is a compulsion driven by fear. When you master this level of self-control, something extraordinary happens. You stop being a victim of circumstances and become the creator of your own experience. People start treating you differently, not because you've changed what you say, but because you've changed how you hold yourself in the world. You become someone who can't be manipulated because you don't need anything from the manipulator. You become someone who can't be controlled because you are not afraid of disapproval. You become someone who can't be diminished because your sense of self doesn't depend on external validation. The final truth: silence that commands. As we reach the end of this journey together, I want you to understand something crucial. This isn't about becoming cold, detached, or antisocial. It is about becoming so secure in your own worth that you no longer need to prove it to others. It is about developing such deep self-knowledge that you can observe the chaos around you without being pulled into it. The silence we're talking about here isn't empty. It is full of presence, full of choice, full of controlled power that can be deployed precisely when and where it will have maximum impact. Think about the people who have had the greatest influence on your life. Chances are, they weren't the loudest or the most talkative. They were the ones who spoke with intention, who listened with presence, who created space for truth to emerge rather than filling every moment with noise. This is your invitation to join their ranks. To stop being someone who reacts to life and become someone who responds to it. To stop giving your power away through compulsive explanation and start holding it through strategic silence. The world doesn't need more talkers. It needs more people who have mastered themselves so completely that their presence alone changes the energy in any room they enter. It needs people who can sit comfortably in silence while others squirm in their own discomfort. It needs people who understand that true strength whispers while weakness shouts. You have this capacity within you right now. The question is, are you ready to stop talking about power and start embodying it? Here is your challenge. For the next 7 days, practice strategic silence. When someone baits you into an argument, observe instead of engaging. When someone criticizes you unfairly, pause before responding. When you feel that familiar urge to explain, defend, or justify yourself, ask, do I need to respond, or do I just want to? Notice what happens. Notice how others react to your stillness. Notice how you feel when you choose your responses instead of being controlled by your reactions. Notice the power that builds when you stop giving it away. The weak shout because they fear they won't be heard. The strong remain silent because they know their presence speaks louder than words ever could. The wise choose carefully when to do either, and in that choice lies the ultimate freedom.